Hello, I'm Dilek Tuna and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at the top stories. The EU vows financial backing for Kyiv and holds off on frozen assets plan. The US president says strikes on land to follow US military attacks on suspected drug smuggling vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific Ocean. At the UN Security Council, Gaza ceasefire takes centre stage as countries condemn Israel's preliminary vote to annex parts of the West Bank. The UN Security Council has convened to review the fragile ceasefire in Gaza as diplomats debated the release of hostages, the delivery of humanitarian aid and ongoing tensions in the region. Key representatives from Israel, the Palestinian Authority and the United States addressed the Council, highlighting both challenges and responsibilities.
As the ceasefire brokered by the United States earlier this month in Gaza continues under close scrutiny, the UN Security Council remains focused on balancing humanitarian relief with security responsibilities in both Gaza and the West Bank. Diplomats debated the future of the ceasefire, the plight of hostages, and the urgent need for humanitarian aid. Palestinian Deputy UN Envoy Majed Bamia said the Palestinian Authority must be empowered to fulfill its duties and that Israel's obligations also need careful monitoring.
The efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority and its ability to perform its duties, despite its full-fledged commitment to peace that has been put to test over the course of the last 2 years in unbelievable manners, aims at preventing our independence and our statehood. If there are requirements placed on the Palestinian Authority, it must be empowered to fulfill them. And Israel has also obligations that need to be monitored and implemented. We will not shy away from our obligations and from our commitments.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, responded, highlighting the ongoing hostage crisis.
Our struggle is not over. There can be no peace, no future, and no rebuilding of Gaza while terror still remains. 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve. The world must keep the pressure where it belongs, on Hamas, to return the hostages, to lay down its weapons, and to honor the peace plan it signed.
As has been noted,
the US also condemned attacks on civilians and hostages, calling for global outrage over recent killings.
And for the global community that has been protesting and demanding peace for the Palestinian people, for the people of Gaza, where is the outrage? Where is it over these executions we've seen in recent days? Hamas is not just attacking Israelis. It's not just terrorizing hostages underground. It's not just using bodies as psychological warfare on families. They are openly killing their own people for propaganda, in addition to the human shields that they've used over the past years. And candidly, shame on the world.
Earlier, Israel's parliament has preliminarily approved a bill to extend sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, a move condemned by Palestinians and closely watched by Washington.
Earlier, we interviewed Ambassador of the State of Palestine to Azerbaijan, Ahmet Matani, on the situation on the ground and the ongoing peace efforts as the ceasefire holds. Let's hear more from him.
All of the international community, they want to solve Palestinian issue, but the Israeli sides, they don't want to solve the problem. My dear, the two-state solution was proposed by the international community, not by the Palestinians. And we accepted, even though it was a painful compromise to accept to take only 22% of our historical land and give them 78%. But even though the Israeli now, they are building the settlements and put the fact on the ground. Hopefully the international community can take its responsibility to force Israel and make pressure on them to accept and respect the international law and United Nations resolution.
European Union leaders have wrapped up a key summit in Brussels where discussions largely focused on fresh support for Ukraine. While Kyiv welcomed new sanctions against Russia, talks over unlocking frozen Russian assets for Ukraine ended without a breakthrough. William Denslow reports from Brussels.
Heading into this summit of European leaders, there was plenty of positive momentum for Kyiv and its allies. Over in the United States, there's that news that that bilateral meeting between President Trump and his Russian counterpart has been scrapped, at least for now. Also, Washington announcing those sanctions on two major Russian oil firms too. Here, on this side of the Atlantic, well, the European Union has announced that 19th round of Russian sanctions. Included in that, a ban on Russian liquefied natural gas from 2027, something that Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, says hits to the heart of Russia's war machine. But the major topic dominating much of the sentiment here at this meeting, a meeting that had Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky in attendance, was that of using Russian frozen assets as a loan for Kyiv, something to the tune of roughly $160 billion. Now, for Kyiv, they say they want to start using those funds as early as 2026. Volodymyr Zelensky says that will go not only towards Ukraine's reconstruction, but also providing it with more military oomph going forward too. The major sticking point, getting the agreement from Belgium. The majority of those assets remain here in this country, and there are concerns about the legal ramifications. Russia has also warned of huge consequences should this plan come to fruition. Belgium is asking for more reassurances from fellow member states, including that if these Russian assets need to be repaid, will all member states chip in and foot the bill? At the conclusion of this meeting, no consensus was reached. That will be a topic for further conversations, potentially the next European Leaders Summit come December. The European Commission has been tasked with coming up with a wide spectrum of potential financing options for Ukraine going forward, but certainly for Kyiv now, huge disappointment that this issue of frozen Russian assets is yet to be resolved. For A News, I'm William Denslow in Brussels.
Oil prices have surged this week following new US sanctions on Russia's top two oil producers. Markets are seeing the strongest gains in months. The price of dated Brent oil produced in the North Sea increased by $5 to $65.53 per barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude has rebounded from 6 months' lows of around $56.40 a barrel. It's now trading at $62.04. The price of Ural's crude oil increased by 6% compared to the previous indicator, reaching $53.72 per barrel. The price of a barrel of Azerbaijani oil of the Azeri Light brand on the world market increased by 5% to $66.75. The rise in oil prices this week followed new US sanctions targeting Russia's two largest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. Together, these companies contribute more than 5% of the world's oil output. Russian President Vladimir Putin has accused the United States of escalating the conflict by allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russian targets. He warned that such actions would cross a dangerous line, saying Moscow is ready to deliver what he called a decisive response if its territory is attacked.
This is an attempt to escalate, but if these weapons are used to strike on Russia, the response will be very serious, even overwhelming. Let them think about it. the US President has decided to cancel or postpone our meeting. More likely, he is talking about postponing it. What can we say? Dialogue is always better than any confrontation, any disputes, or especially war. That is why we have always supported continued dialogue, and we continue to support it.
The east wing of the White House is being demolished to make way for a $250 million ballroom. President Donald Trump's plan is fueling political, cultural and architectural debate across the United States.
The east wing of the White House is being demolished. President Donald Trump plans a $250 million ballroom. Current situation has sparked a question among people. Who is funding the project?
I mean, it's not very clear, A, who's paying for it. It's not clear who approves this. I don't even know if there's an approval process for demoing parts of the White House.
It speaks to the corruption of the whole system. I think we're about to lose democracy if we haven't already lost it. It may be too late, and I can't believe that the people who are in the Congress and the Senate are smart enough to realize what is going to happen to them after this.
The White House responded, saying a list of donors has been released and that President Trump has committed his own resources.
We have released the full list of donors thus far. Perhaps there will be more people who want to generously contribute to this project. And the president, yes, has committed his own resources. And when he releases that information, which I'm very confident he will, you will all see that.
But not everyone is on board. Democrats have voiced strong opposition to the project. However, Democrats in Washington have little power, with Republicans holding majorities in the House of Representatives and Senate.
The president believes that he is the king of this country and that he can control everything regardless of what the law says or what we send him.
Demolition of the East Wing is not just a political issue. Experts say it also poses a cultural and architectural challenge. The proposed 90,000 square foot ballroom could overwhelm the White House's classical design.
The White House is one of the most iconic buildings in the United States, and it deserves our protection. The fact that part of it has been demolished begs the question, what more might be done to the White House if we don't work together to try to stop this?
Meanwhile, the administration defends the project as part of ongoing renovations, citing precedent from previous presidents.
Japan's new Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, the first woman ever to hold the post, says her government aims to conclude a long-delayed peace treaty with Russia. In her inaugural address to Parliament, she acknowledged strained relations but vowed to resolve the dispute over the Northern Territories while maintaining Japan's stance on the war in Ukraine.
Relations between Japan and Russia remain complicated, but the policy of the Japanese government is to resolve the issue of the Northern Territories and conclude a peace treaty. We will continue to criticize Russia's ongoing actions in Ukraine, but dialogue and diplomacy remain essential to achieving lasting stability in our region. Japan will act firmly, responsibly, and with determination to ensure peace and security in Northeast Asia.
Welcome back to A News. Today we're looking at the Brussels summit of EU leaders where Ukraine was front and centre. The bloc committed to long-term defence readiness and financial backing, but questions remain. Can the EU turn words into action, and will divisions among member states undermine a united front? Joining me to unpack today is Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat from Rabat, Morocco. Ambassador, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Now, the summit concluded with a political decision to back Ukraine's defence for the next 2 years. Now, with the broad commitment made, what are the practical milestones we should expect to see by, say, mid-2026 to judge if this wasn't just rhetoric?
Well, we've already seen that, for example, the European Union has beefed up the economic packages bilaterally, at least, and the procurement of weapons of mid and short range offensiveness, especially the Germans, right now, since the British went out of the European Union with Brexit, but they are also contributing with offensive weapons in a very big way. The Storm Shadow missile, the British Storm Shadow missile, is now the most terrible, the most effective weapon in the Ukrainian arsenal. The second thing that needs to be said is that, unfortunately, because of the Belgian blockage, the use of the 140 billion euros of frozen Russian assets to build a comprehensive package of financial aid, not only for military procurement, but also for humanitarian aid and for reconstruction of the country, has been frozen. It has been frozen because the Belgian government has some concerns over the legality of doing this. It is quite obvious that there is no legal concern at all, because they're not going to use the assets. They're not going to transfer the Russian frozen assets, because that would be, of course, stealing. They're going to use the interest generated by the frozen assets to structure a loan deal. So it really is a non-issue. It's a non-controversy.
Okay.
And lastly, the other thing that we must understand, as you were very well saying, was the readiness, the military readiness. And there we always have the same problem. The European Union was not meant as a military alliance. There are 27 member states, and we still have two very staunch neutral countries in our midst, Ireland and Austria, and they're not going to transform into full NATO members anytime soon, as was the case of Finland and Sweden.
Okay, now I did want to come to the frozen assets of Russia. One of the major sticking points was how to use this 140 billion proposed to fund Ukraine's military and budget needs. But what legal and political and strategic risks do you see from this approach?
Let's start with the strategic risks. The strategic risk is, of course, that Russia considers this a double aggression. On the one hand, they will consider this as their assets being misused or being used against them. That is something that the Russian spokesperson apparatus is already saying, and the propaganda of the Russian regime in Russia and abroad is already saying in a very loud voice. The second problems are the political problems within the EU itself, because bizarrely, although the Slovak Republic or Hungary did not voice concern over the package, and it was Belgium, but it would have been for different reasons. In the Belgians would be for the legal reasons that I will analyze right now again, and the Slovaks and the Hungarians are very reluctant to escalate any kind of, let's call it, I would call it beefing up the offensive capacities of Ukraine, so that they can sit at the negotiating table with a better position than they have today. And finally, the legal aspect. The legal aspect, as I said, in my opinion, and I am a trained lawyer in international law, actually. The main aspect to consider is that the 140 billion frozen Russian assets are not going to be transferred to Ukraine and are not going to be used to procure Ukraine with defensive and offensive weapons. They are going to be the interest that these assets have generated already since they were frozen and will generate hence onwards. Those interests are going to be used to structure a legally well conceived and designed loan structure that will help Ukraine in the three aspects that I said: humanitarian aid, reconstruction of the country, and of course military procurement. So there is no legal problem. Let's see if that once the legal problems, let's say, have been let's say clarified by all the member states. Let's hope that the political side, the last thing that you expressed or that you asked, will not be the new obstacle.
Okay. And Ambassador, again, you mentioned this in your answer to my first question. There is internal resistance among the EU member states, Belgium demanding risk sharing. How significant is this disagreement? Could it derail the unity the EU needs to present?
Well, we have seen that the unity in the European Union, as far as Ukraine is concerned, is not completely monolithical. Again, I resort to Hungary and Slovakia as main doubters. Let's call them for the lack of a better word. And then, of course, I do understand the cautious position of the Belgian government, because a lot of those frozen assets are actually in Belgium or in Belgian banks. So it is a very big problem, because they could be facing a cascade of lawsuits, and not only in the European courts, but probably maybe in other courts around the world. Let's not forget that there are more than one country or judges around the world that consider that they have universal jurisdiction. So this is the concern that the Belgian government was voicing, and it is logical. I mean, I don't share it. I don't think that they have a legal base to consider that this can be a risk, but it is perfectly understandable that they do.
Okay. And Ambassador, again, you briefly touched on the idea of the EU slowly moving towards a military alliance. But what I wanted to ask you was the summit approved a defence plan called Readiness 2030, which seeks to boost European self-defence and military procurement by decade's end. In your view, is this the beginning of Europe turning into a serious military actor, or is it another strategic aspiration? Because you did mention that Ireland and Austria are quite staunch on that idea.
Well, Ireland and Austria are neutral countries for different reasons. In the case of Ireland, because it is their political philosophy since they gained independence from the United Kingdom. And in the case of Austria, it was because it was a neutralized country, because it was on the border between the West and the East, and it was very much what happened to the Finnish, to Finland. That was a neutralized country, even if they didn't want to be neutral. Of course, they became neutral, and it ran into their DNA. But of course, now they're not. Quite frankly, to transform the European Union into a military alliance, or to give the European Union a military branch or a military pillar, is going to be complicated. It's not going to be an easy task, and not only because of the two neutral countries. It's not going to be an easy task because you require, if the European common common policy and security policy are based on unanimity, military policy cannot be based solely on unanimity. If just imagine to try to reach an agreement between 27 member states on readiness, on armament systems, on defensive systems, on missile systems. Whose system are we going to use? Are we going to use the Swedish missiles? Are we going to use the Finnish weapons? Are we going to use the German systems? Are we going to use the French Rafale? Are we going to use the Eurofighter? Are we going to accept the 6th generation fighter jet that is being developed by 4 countries and not the other ones? Because it's France, it's Germany, it's Italy, and Spain that are developing the 6th generation fighter jet. And then the other ones can say, what about us? For example, the Czech Republic has a very advanced aeronautical industry, and the Swedes. Let's not forget the Swedes that have Saab, which is one of the most formidable fighter planes in the world right now. So it is a very complicated thing, and it has a lot of aspects that need to be taken into account. And it's not just about the readiness that we all agree on, and the risks that we face because of the Russian expansionism, but we have other risks. Of course, we have the southern border and the southern fronts that can in one way or another overspilled. Let's not forget that this has been the most violent year in the Sahel and in the north of the sub-Saharan African countries as far as terrorist attacks have been concerned. The resurgence of Al-Qaeda in IPSWA, which is the branch of Daesh in Nigeria, or Boko Haram, has multiplied by 10 in only 2 years. So this is also a front that we must not neglect.
Okay, now the summit produced a mix of commitments, Ambassador: military, financial, defence, industrial cooperation. Which element do you think is lagging most in execution, and why?
Well, I think that the financial commitment is pretty strong. In spite of everything. In that, the Commission, since they do have quite firm executive powers, is not going to be, in my opinion, an issue. And then, of course, the biggest contributor to the European Union, which is Germany, has made a quantum leap in its defense spending by committing 100 billion euros in a very short period of time to try to catch up with what the army of a country of 90-something million people and one of the world's largest economies should look like. And of course, if you compare the German Luftwaffe with much smaller countries, it's pretty similar, and Germany is maybe 10 times larger in the scale of population, for example, compared to Sweden. Sweden has probably the largest per capita air force, if not in the world, definitely one of the largest in the world. In terms, the largest in the world, by the way, is Singapore, by a very long shot. And again, let me tell you one thing, since I mentioned Singapore.
Okay, we'll wrap it up, Ambassador, if you don't mind.
That even the Prime Minister of Singapore was telling like-minded democracies that we need to act up, and that we need to create alliances, multilateral alliances of like-minded democracies. Just imagine if Singapore is asking us and the European Union is not being able to do it, we should be seriously looking into our flaws.
Okay, Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us today. That's all we have time for, unfortunately. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for your insight.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure is mine.
Welcome back. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Israel has blocked Turkey from participating in international stabilization forces planned for the Gaza Strip after the recent conflict. Diplomatic sources say Ankara had expressed readiness to send troops to assist in post-war recovery efforts, but Israel opposed the move, citing alleged political and ideological ties between Turkey and Hamas. Washington supported Israel's position, stating that the mission must remain neutral and focused on humanitarian tasks. The stabilization forces are expected to help restore infrastructure, coordinate aid, and ensure security in Gaza. Russian President Vladimir Putin and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev held a phone conversation. According to the Kremlin, the discussion continued their earlier talks held on the 9th of October during the CIS summit in Dushanbe. The two leaders reviewed a number of pressing issues on the bilateral agenda and reaffirmed their commitment to further strengthening trade and economic cooperation, as well as advancing joint projects in the energy and transport logistics sectors. Armenia's Minister of Foreign Affairs Ararat Mirzoyan met with Gerard Larcher, President of the French Senate, on Thursday. The officials discussed Armenia-France strategic ties and upcoming steps to strengthen cooperation. They exchanged views on developments in the South Caucasus. Mirzoyan briefed his French counterparts on the latest developments in the South Caucasus, outlining Armenia's vision for the region's future in the context of achieving peace with Azerbaijan. The meeting ended with Mirzoyan signing the Senate's Golden Book, calling it an honor to be hosted at the home of democracy and the rule of law. Earlier, we spoke to analysts from both Baku and Yerevan for perspectives on regional cooperation and political developments in the South Caucasus. From Baku, Rusif Husseinov, director of the Topchubashov Center, said that Azerbaijan and Armenia share a common goal of boosting regional and transcontinental connectivity, noting that reopening transport routes would benefit not only both countries, but also the wider Middle Corridor trade network. And from Yerevan, Boris Navasardian, a political analyst, said that Armenia is preparing for democratic elections next year, emphasizing that true democracy means unpredictability.
The one thing I know is that both countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, they are on the same page in terms of connectivity issues. Both countries are convinced and are driven by the desire to open the communication lines and roads, not only for their own benefits, but for the regional and even transcontinental connectivity, because we're playing a big game here. It's not only about Armenia, Azerbaijan, or South Caucasus. It's about the global trade.
I think we are doing this work, and the more intense will be our meetings, and the more productive they will be in terms of delivering constructive ideas, the better our societies will be ready to continue the peace process, irrespective of internal political and possible changes. But I guess since the ruling party in Armenia is really interested in moving forward as quickly as possible, even in the rhetorics of the opposition in Armenia, we see more and more constructive pieces. They are not more trying to discredit as it before the August 8 agreements.
An international forum dedicated to the opening of the Baku Arbitration Center has brought together legal experts, diplomats and business leaders from various countries. Our correspondent Nuray Mustafa reports.
The International Forum Azerbaijan Arbitration Days 2025 has officially commenced today in Baku. Taking place over 2 days, 24 and 25 October, the event focuses on discussions around developments in arbitration and marks the official launch of the Baku Arbitration Center. According to the organizers, the event has brought together over 600 participants, including more than 70 leading experts, lawyers, and government officials from various countries. 7 panel discussions will be held addressing topics such as the role of arbitration as a dispute resolution mechanism, regional cooperation opportunities, and contemporary practices in international arbitration. The newly established Baku Arbitration Center will function as a permanent arbitration institution.
During the international forum marking the launch of the Baku Arbitration Center, the A-News team conducted an interview with President Emeritus of the European Council, Charles Michel. We now bring you an excerpt from that exclusive interview.
Mr. Michel, when you first met President Ilham Aliyev some years ago, did you foresee that peace might one day return to the Caucasus and that you would personally contribute to that process? How do you evaluate the current state of the peace efforts in the region?
I've tried to do my best in my previous positions to facilitate some talks between Azerbaijan and Armenia. I had the occasion to work closely with President Aliyev, but also with Prime Minister Pashinyan. And I remember that at that time I was not underestimating the magnitude of the challenges, the magnitude of the difficulties, and really tried by being innovative, by being helpful, by being respectful, to make some suggestions and some proposals to help this normalization and to help this and to support this peace process. And today I'm very pleased and even confident, because I'm observing that progress are achieved. That's very important, and my wish is that in the weeks to come, in the months to come, even more efforts can be done so that this peace process will be a sustainable framework, a sustainable approach, and that's also an important condition to develop more regional cooperation for the benefit of all the countries and the people in that region, including in Azerbaijan.
Uzbekistan and the European Union are taking their partnership to a new level. Tashkent is set to sign an enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, a landmark deal that expands trade, investment and green transition ties between the two sides. Our correspondent Sevil Rajapova reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan and the European Union are set to sign a new enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, authorized by the European Union Council in October 2024. Negotiations began in 2018 and concluded in 2022, replacing the previous partnership agreement signed in 1996. The new deal expands cooperation across trade, investment, governance, digitalization and climate action. According to the European Union, the EPCA will significantly upgrade the regulatory framework for trade and economic relations with Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan's bilateral trade with the European Union has grown significantly, from about $2.6 billion in 2017 to approximately $6.4 billion in 2024. The signing follows the first ever European Union Central Asia Summit held in Samarkand in April 2025, attended by leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan. At the meeting, the European Union announced a $12.8 billion global gateway investment package to strengthen connectivity, energy and infrastructure across the region. Uzbekistan's deal joined the broader landscape of the European Union agreements with neighboring and regional states. With Kazakhstan, the European Union signed its EPCA in 2015 and it entered into force in 2020. Kyrgyzstan signed in 2024 and Tajikistan initialed its text in July 2025. Armenia's agreement with the European Union was signed in November 2017 and entered into force in March 2021. Meanwhile, with Azerbaijan, the European Union relationship is governed by a partnership and cooperation agreement in force since 1999. As a landlocked country, Uzbekistan depends on transit roads through Kazakhstan and Caucasus to reach global markets. This makes infrastructure and logistics key to the agreement's success. The EPCA offers Uzbekistan improved access to European Union markets and investment, while giving the European Union a stable partner in the strategic region. It is Sevil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Welcome back to A News. Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has wrapped up a key diplomatic tour of the Gulf, visiting Kuwait, Qatar and Oman in a three-day push to deepen regional cooperation. The trip focused on trade, investment and strategic coordination, but Gaza was also high on the agenda. As Ankara strengthens its Gulf outreach, questions arise about what this tour signals for Turkey's broader regional strategy and how its stance on Gaza fits into this picture. Joining us to discuss further is Valeria Gianotta, academic and director of CESPI from Rome, Italy. Valeria, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for inviting. Good evening.
Now, President Erdogan's visit to Oman marks the final stop in a three-nation Gulf tour. What overarching message is Turkey trying to send with this diplomatic push?
You know, it has been a very interesting and important trip, starting from Kuwait, passing through Qatar, and then finally ended up in Oman. As you mentioned, many agreements have been signed at bilateral and multilateral level, but I think what is the main signal is that Ankara is keen to establish a long-term partnership with the Gulf countries. And when we look at it has been historically an important country, also a long Ottoman Empire for Turkey. It's also of crucial importance from the perspective of connectivity in terms of a gateway for entering and accessing the Indo-Pacific region. Therefore, Ankara once more proves to be a pivot in the region, not just in the Middle East, not just in the Gulf, but also a pivotal actor with a global vocation, global projection. Besides the agreements, definitely there are also some strategic aspects that are of great importance, because in Oman, the main point was discussed in terms of connectivity. We know that Turkey has been proposing the so-called development project to connect the Gulf countries throughout Iraq, to Turkey, and finally to Europe. It is also to be intended as an alternative to the Indian and Middle East corridor that is on the table of the many regional actors, also many European policymakers. So in terms of diversification of logistic route, in terms of connectivity, but also in terms of security of the Gulf in the region, I think these trips marks the difference.
Okay, so security, connectivity. Let's talk economics, Valeria. What are the key trade or investment outcomes from these visits, and do they point to deeper financial cooperation ahead?
Definitely, many agreements have been sealed in terms of economy, and when we speak about economy, okay, mutual investment in the field of energy, the transition of energy towards a green energy as well. Another crucial point which was touched upon was defense and defense cooperation. I mean, Turkey, it's not a new information that has been arising as one of the main sellers in terms of unmanned drones. But when we look at the agreements signed in Kuwait and overall in Qatar, it's not just a relationship made by buyers and sellers, but it's also a new strategic relations made upon a win-win partnership, a joint production of these military capabilities. So defense is another important topic, as well as political coordination when it comes to military forces, when it comes to training as well. And anything has to be read, as we say, throughout the lenses of maintaining the security of the region as much as possible, because Ankara is pretty much aware basically that anything happening in the region has a spillover effect within its own territory. Another important point that it was touched in Kuwait, it was also a sort of maritime agreement and the limitation of maritime zone. Definitely, I mean, we see that when it comes to the relations with Kuwait, also the intent is to increase the level of bilateral investment to $4 billion. So there is a pretty much mutual understanding, and the way it's open to reach a new threshold in terms of investment and in terms of new cooperation, rising to the level of strategic cooperation.
Okay, Valeria, I want to move on to Gaza now. It was prominently on the agenda. How significant is Turkey's role in the ongoing talks and mediation efforts related to the humanitarian and political crisis there?
Turkey has been one of the main vocal actors since the eruption of the war on Gaza back 2 years ago by denouncing the catastrophe unfolding in the Strip. Nowadays is also a main actor, I mean, involved in sending aid to the Strip. We read the news that nowadays many foundations related to the Turkish government entered the Strip and they are delivering food and clean water. The next step, definitely involving Ankara, is just trying to find a way to send some troops, some forces on the Strip in terms of capacity building and in terms of stability. The role of Turkey and Erdogan has been crucial, also along with the Sharm el-Sheikh summit that was held in the past weeks, where Erdogan basically tried to play the role of balancing between the forces around the table, and also he objected quite severely the participation of the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Also, when it comes to the Turkish forces on the ground in Gaza, this is becoming a very hectic point, because in one hand, Ankara received the support by the United States. On the other hand, nowadays we are encountering a sort of opposition by Israel.
Okay, I want to talk more about that now. Despite Turkey's engagement, Israel has been resistant to Ankara's involvement in the Gaza peace process, citing alleged political and ideological ties between Turkey and Hamas. Let's hone in on that. Can you analyze that for me, please?
Yes, definitely. What makes the difference between Turkey and other members of international community is that Turkey does not really recognize Hamas as a terrorist organization, but it recognizes as opposition movement. And Ankara has been constantly in touch with the political wing of Hamas, and we have also recorded many bilateral visits in Ankara itself as well. Recently, when President Erdogan went to Qatar, it seems that also a meeting with the exponents of Hamas was held. I mean, between some policymaker figures from the Turkish side as well. So definitely, Turkey is also playing, due to this stronger connection with Hamas, Turkey is also trying to play a mediation role between the international community and Hamas. We shouldn't neglect, for example, that before the declaration that the Hamas accepted the peace plan proposed by Donald Trump, a phone call by Donald Trump to Erdogan. And it seems that, again, Turkey played a crucial role in mediating the stance in order to find a middle way, a path towards the peace process. So definitely also we should expect that along with this peace plan, that is forecasting the shutdown of Hamas as a terrorist organization, Ankara will welcome some of the Hamas members in its territory, and already due to the strong connection that Turkey has with Hamas, it's not recognized as a terrorist.
Okay, and is Israel's reluctance toward Turkey's mediation rooted only in ideological distrust, or more about regional competition for influence? What do you think?
Definitely both of them. I mean, it's not a mystery. It's not something new that between Erdogan and Netanyahu, also historically, there has been a sort of tension, and the relations between Israel and Turkey have been following a sort of ups and down logic since Erdogan came to power. Also, there was, we recorded many ruptures in terms of diplomatic relations. Definitely the ideological base is there, but moreover there is the aspiration of Israel as well to play a great role in terms of regional influence. It was evident in the escalation that has been made in Syria, for example, when Israel kept bombing territories, and they may put in danger the Turkish position there. And also in this regard, it should be acknowledged the role of Azerbaijan in terms of mediation between the two sides. Honestly, I want to believe that Turkey and Israel will come to an open conflict, because anyway, both of them, they are sort of a front line for the West. And we shouldn't neglect that Turkey is the second largest army within NATO. So an open confrontation will be meaning involving also the transatlantic alliance.
Definitely. Valeria, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us on the program. I appreciate your time and insight.
You're welcome.
You're up to date with world news for the hour. Stay tuned for more updates.